Is it just me, or were we told there was going to be a party? It's like all of 2025. We were working out, getting in really good shape, getting a haircut, picking out just the right clothes. Maybe we were even pre drinking a little bit. We were getting ready for this big party. The party was supposed to be at the Owl's house. And maybe Scott Besson is like his roommate or something. Nobody really knows. But, anyways, they have this house and there was supposed to be a giant party there. And we were getting ready for the party, but the invitation never came. The invitation to the party never showed up. And it was obvious there were a few ingredients that had to come together in just the right combination for the party to happen. There had to be a certain amount of clarity in terms of crypto regulation. There had to be a lot of liquidity. And our ecosystem, Cardano, had to be in good shape to be ready for the party. But the invitation never came. It feels like it's just today when the ingredients maybe are starting to fit together. Maybe things are starting to happen just enough to maybe feel like we're on the road to at least get the invitation to the party. If you're still holding out hope that the party can happen, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right. Thank you for joining, everyone. Thank you for joining. Let's see who's here. Bindocamp's here. Cardano for the win is here. Emilio, thank you for joining. Good luck. Good luck in the fiat mines. Jerry H is here. J. Marie is here. Basque B is here. Thank you for joining so early in the Netherlands, Basque B. Appreciate it. Hola, Rouleau. Thomas Kirkpatrick is here. Frazek is here. Easeweeze is here. Easeweeze says, what's good, AOS? Remember your vid on Crypto Time Traveler 2. I look back at his post to see how we're tracking against his post. Yeah, we have not heard. We have not heard from the Time Traveler in a long time. Is he still around? Is the Time Traveler still around making predictions? Boca J Zaravla is here. Kickflips is here. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. So obviously, this was year 4 of the 4-year cycle, and we had certain expectations. We were told there was going to be a party, and while it wasn't, in our wildest dreams, it wasn't going to look exactly like this. Like, I'm not sure how Jay Powell is on the turntables, but there was supposed to be a party, and this kind of represents the amount of liquidity. His job was, along with Scott Besson, to bring the liquidity that's necessary to bring retail in to start the party. We also needed to do our thing in Cardano. Cardano needed to be in good shape, vis-a-vis its competitors, and, certain things needed to happen. Congress needed to do its job. They needed to get some reasonable crypto regulation in place. A few different things had to happen in order for that invitation to show up so we could start the party. The invitation never showed up. The party never started, at least so far. But I feel like today, and I think yesterday, what we talked about yesterday was a little bit of it was a little foreshadowing of what it felt like today, because today a few things happened and it feels like the kind of stuff that should have been happening like 6 months ago so that the party could happen in Q4 like it was supposed to. Now, when is the party going to start? Nobody knows. But I think today a few things started happening that I hope revived people's hope that we can have the party. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Let's see. Spooky Tech is here. Thank you for joining. Matt Long is here. Kristen Bowman is here. What's up? Sub-Zero is here. Daniil is here. Darker Nights. Oh man, that'd be great if the Dark Nights would go away and we could just have our party. That'd be fantastic. Mission Zambi is here. Corny G is here. I'm also ready for a party, Corny G. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about the mining today. I think all of our mines did a lot better today, especially since they started reflecting that boost from 600 and what was it, 27 million to 1 billion Night tokens being awarded to us during this phase of the drop. So let's look at what happened today first. This is how people were reacting to it. I thought this well represented what we're all hoping. Like, we need that money printer goes burr meme in the background, and we kind of know this is sort of, that happening is sort of something that happens in combination between Besant at Treasury and the Owl over at the Federal Reserve. Like, they both got to do their things. They have many sort of stealthy tools for introducing liquidity into the system, but they kind of have to work in coordination. And we know all of the debt needs to get turned over. So it has to happen. The liquidity has to come at some point. It just hasn't come yet. That ingredient hasn't quite materialized. But today, people started feeling different. People are posting things like this. A lot of excitement today. You could sort of just feel it. Everybody's really getting ready for this meme. Here's the meme everybody is accustomed to. This is what we want to see, and we just haven't seen it happening yet today. So before we talk more about some of the other ingredients, let's talk a little bit about the scavenger mine. So we got this notification from the Midnight Foundation. Following last week's increase to the scavenger mine allocation, users will start seeing their night balances increase by over 50%. And they wanted to let us know that adjustments are rolling out in batches as each day's results are refreshed. So balances will update gradually over the next day or so. I definitely saw a big boost to my balances in the sort of the Midnight Foundation, browser interface. Sounds like some of you did too. Did everybody see pretty big increases in their in the interface? Jet Ski Goose wants us to know the McRib is back. Get ready for the pump, guys. Hey, if that's the omen, if that's the groundhog that lets us know that the pump is back, I'll be happy to celebrate the return of the McRib if that's the thing, if that's the signal. Yep, sounds like RH Pazzo saw the same thing. Otis Friccio, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Cardano Universe, also, thank you for joining. Yeah, I still think that it's a great name. That would be a great name for the Midnight Podcast, but that UAP podcast with the same name is like a little bit too big. I don't know how. There's probably a lot of podcasts out there called The Night Shift, but I think that one in particular might be a little bit too big to call the Midnight One Night Shift. Mick Katsky, thank you for joining. Glad you made it live. So we saw these increases. Sounds like people saw these increases in the interface. We also saw some more indications of just how much some of the, multi-mega rig miners were getting. So this post says, I dedicated 6 machines I have at home to it. I spent 3 to 4 days setting up 110 browsers across different machines. And of course, we've seen bigger numbers than that, actually. Later, learned about the shared open source tools on Midnight Discord, learned to build them, and spun up 3 more machines. By the end of the night, by the end, at least 120K plus night. So I think this poster, Eddie Shark, is saying, I think they're saying by the end of the scavenger mine, they'll have 120K plus night. I would imagine there are a bunch of people out there who are going to exceed that. I have this strange feeling there are going to be some crazy numbers. People are going to put up some crazy, crazy numbers. And those will probably be the same people who will not go on social media and advertise how much they collected. Jose Cano, thank you. Thank you for joining. Okay. Easweed says crypto time traveler said ADA is going to $20 and it's written into code. He said his mission was ending when the queen died. She died and then he left. I remember the death of the queen was a big deal for the crypto time traveler. I remember that part. Let's see. You heard of Logan's partnership with Worth, real world adoption around the corner. I have not heard about this. Oh, Iagon. Sorry, not Logan. Iagon. I misread that. I'm sorry. I have not heard about that. Kim Cha-ching, thank you for joining. So it looks like I have a feeling. I have a feeling people will do a little forensic looking around, and they're going to discover some very large wallets, or some very large wallets will become. It will become apparent to people that there's some very large wallets that will collect a lot. Probably after we get that first 25% tranche at some point in the future. People will discover there's some very large wallets, and I guess maybe it'll be hard to tell whether they received those amounts through the scavenger mine or through their allocation during phase 1 of the glacier drop. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, or if we'll be able to tell really. Um, let's see. This is a good comment from Bindocam. I'm going to laugh if each wallet requires ADA and a smart contract to claim. So there's a few questions. There's a few questions if practical questions for these people that have hundreds of wallets. Will they need to distribute a tiny bit of ADA into each of those wallets to claim their massive amounts of NIGHT tokens? There could be some practical considerations like that pop up. We'll see. Also, this was kind of an interesting bit of news. So this has been something, a few of you brought this up in the comments. And this is just more of the very thorough approach of Cardano. This says ISO 20022 support is essential to open banking and combining the TradFi and DeFi worlds. ADA is glad to be holding the line with XRP, HBAR, Algo, and others. And you can see right here, Cardano is one of the ecosystems hitting this standard with ADA. So I kind of like that in Cardano. Like it seems like things like this don't really fall through the cracks. You could argue that some things in Cardano development have fallen through the cracks. Historically, Plutus application backend, things like that in the past. But I feel like Cardano was pretty on top of things like this, little things like this. And part of that is just our very, very careful, measured approach to development of the ecosystem. Yep. Okay, yep. Yep. Sorry, trying to get my mouse is having trouble traveling where I needed to this other screen. Okay, yep. It was Otis Fritio that brought that up a couple streams ago. Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, whenever we're meeting some standard, if it's going to be beneficial, if it puts banks at ease or whatever it is, I think it's great. Chainlink community had a lot to say about Cardano not meeting this ISO standard today. Were they claiming that we were not meeting it? I think Charles is saying we are meeting it. We are meeting that standard. It looks like, I don't know where you got this infographic from, but it's definitely mentioning ADA right there. So I don't know what those guys are talking about if that's the case. So this was probably some of the bigger news, and I think this is the first sort of piece coming out of Washington. We've talked a lot about the liquidity issue, like when is the liquidity going to come? The news today was largely this other ingredient to the party, and this is the Washington piece. We were supposed to get the sort of reasonable regulation for crypto before now. We were already supposed to get it, the market structure bill. They passed the Clarity Act. That was a done deal in the House. And we needed something in the Senate, whatever they were going to call it, some kind of market structure bill. Another piece we needed, though, was the follow-on regulation. We needed the IRS to jump on board, give us some reasonable tax guidance that goes along with this more reasonable regulation of crypto by other, agencies in the federal government. And today it seems like we did get a piece of that from the IRS. So Scott Bessent posted, today, U.S. Treasury and the IRS issued new guidance giving crypto exchange traded products, ETPs, a clear path to stake digital assets and share staking rewards with their retail investors. This move increases investor benefits, boosts innovation, and keeps America the global leader in digital asset and blockchain technology. So if you ever want to find these IRS releases, you go to this page right here. It has all of the IRS drops. So that almost seems like a little, it's like the lingo is almost a little too street for me. It's like, is the IRS really dropping anything? It's, I guess they are. It's like almost a little too cool. I feel like it's, I feel like it's somebody's grandfather, trying to wear, the latest Nikes or something like that. So anyways, here is the actual document. Here's what the document looks like. And, this wasn't gigantic. This was like 18 pages, but it's a little bit dense, a little bit of information. So I took the liberty of going through that entire document and trying to pull out things that I thought were relevant to Cardano. So Thomas Kirkpatrick says, was a lot of Chainlink maxi talk. I don't know enough to provide any nuance. Brian Packard, thank you for joining. AI enthusiast, yo, thank you for joining. So here's why this thread represents why I think this was actually a big deal. So I think Cardano's self-custodied and natively liquid staking is going to shine under these rules. And here's why. So first off, the IRS guidance basically goes through what the SEC had to do to pave the way for this guidance. So the SEC allowed, essentially, we're going to be doing a lot of oversimplification here because we're not getting into the nuances of, this 18-page document. There's no time for that. So allow for some oversimplification. And this was just a quick cursory read of this 18-page document, as I noted up here. So understand this is not going to be a super deep dive, technical explanation of what's going on here. We're just going to hit the high points. So the SEC allowed that liquid staking rewards and proof of stake were largely not going to be securities unless they were otherwise related to an investment contract. This was the big piece. If the IRS hadn't gotten that from the SEC, that was really necessary to pave the way for what they're doing here today. So they went through the things that the SEC did. Next, the IRS summarizes the liquidity requirements for trusts trading on national exchanges. So these ETPs want to hit a certain, they want to hit a certain category, basically, when it comes to the IRS, right? They want to be treated, they want a certain tax treatment. And in order to hit that tax treatment, they have to follow the IRS guidance. And prior to this document, they really did not have good guidance. So this document is going to lay out for them all of the things the IRS wants to see them meet in order to get that tax treatment. So here, the IRS is going to lay out the liquidity requirements for ETPs trying to hit this treatment as trust. So the first part of this actually involves the generic listing standards of the national security exchanges where these trust interests are being listed and traded. And the biggest piece of this is something that should be music to the ears of all of us in Cardano, and that's that they have to hit certain liquidity requirements. And if you know about the difference between Cardano's natively liquid, self-custodied staking versus a lot of its competitors, like the robbery forest, there's a big difference in liquidity, specifically, pretty much at all times, but it makes a really big difference when it's time to withdraw your funds. Because you have self-custody of your assets when you stake in Cardano, you can have your assets back whenever you want. But as we've covered on this channel recently, the queue, the line, the waiting time to withdraw your assets in a lot of other ecosystems can be long because it's not self-custody. You actually don't retain custody. You give custody to someone else. So to get your assets back recently, the wait has been as long as something like 40 days. I think we saw not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago in Ethereum. This poses really big problems when the IRS is saying things like this. Pursuant to these generic listing standards, if a trust has on a daily basis less than 85% of its assets readily available to meet redemption requests, the trust must have and disclose written liquidity risk policies and procedures reasonably designed to address the risk that it could not meet requests to redeem interests issued by the trust. So basically, the IRS is saying here, hey, we want you to be able to readily redeem 85% of the assets of your trust or you have to explain to us how you're going to address the risk that you can't redeem those interests. And they're going to give you a little more fine-grained detail down here in orange. They say an asset is not deemed readily available to meet redemption requests if it is, basically encumbered in some way, segregated, pledged, hypothecated, encumbered, or otherwise restricted or prevented from being liquidated, sold, transferred, or signed within 1 business day. So they're saying, hey, 85% of your assets better be redeemable within 1 business day. And if not, you better explain to us how you're addressing the risk that you might not be able to meet requests to redeem interests. So this is a huge problem if the wait time to get your assets back is 40 days in some of these other ecosystems. So obviously, a base layer withdrawal queue of 40 days is not going to cut it when they're asking for 1 business day. So immediately, if you're familiar with the arguments the proponents of some of these other chains always put forward when we start talking about the lack of liquidity and staking on those chains, what they always object is that, hey, sure, that's true on the base layer, with the actual native staking. But really what we're doing is what's going on with these liquid staking derivatives, right? You stake, but then you get issued this liquid staking derivative and you can have that and do whatever you want with it. So they try to, say that basically it's as good as natively liquid staking. But you got to notice in this language from the IRS, they say, for this purpose, an asset is deemed not readily available if it is, encumbered in any way, basically, so that it can't be redeemed on 1 business day notice. They don't say, hey, for this purpose, you're good if the asset or some related derivative is readily available. That's not what they say. They're talking specifically about that asset. There's no language in here that provides for dragging the staking derivatives into this argument. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This focus on the actual asset in the trust and not these, related staking derivatives. So next, the IRS lays out the actual safe harbor, the important part of this document for all of crypto. Basically, they're saying you can include staking in these ETPs and still get the federal tax treatment as an investment trust and as a grantor trust, as long as you meet the requirements of the safe harbor. So this is very interesting, I'm sure, for Wall Street, because they want to provide these ETPs, and their big hope is that they can provide the ETPs to their customers and also provide their customers with the staking rewards, right? This makes it a more attractive product for them. Okay, let's see. Easweez says, did you think Snoop wore the ADA logo during the Super Bowl halftime, or was that just some other Crip stuff? I didn't see it. Tag me in some picture. If there's a picture on X, tag me in a picture of him wearing it on X. I never saw it. I think I heard something about this, but I never actually saw any images. So here are the requirements to meet this safe harbor. And here's where it gets more interesting for Cardano, I think. So the requirements are kind of what you'd expect. The interests in the trust must be traded on a national securities exchange. The trust owns only cash and units of a single type of digital asset. So this is important. The trust can only own cash and units of a single type of digital asset. The trust can't own like every type of digital asset under the sun and just decide to stake like one of them. It can only own cash and units of a single type of digital asset. So this is already kind of, cutting against this idea that liquid staking derivatives are going to be treated the same as the actual asset, like Ether, for purposes of redemption liquidity. And they say the trust digital assets must be held by a custodian. So additional requirements. The trust has got to mitigate chances of a situation where some third party owns a majority of the staked assets of that type. So they don't want the trust, these ETPs, to be holding some asset and staking it where there's some danger that some additional third party might get a hold of a majority of the assets and do things that are going to be bad for that asset. The trust can only do 7 different things with the asset. So you can't be like, a stable coin provider. You can't do the kinds of things with the assets that like a stable coin provider might do, like Tether back in the day. They're happy to get, all of that, that crypto in exchange for Tether because they're going to do things with the crypto to get a yield for it. These trusts, these ETPs are not allowed to do that. They can only do 7 things. They can accept deposits of the digital asset or cash. They can hold the digital assets of cash. They can pay trust expenses and sell digital assets for cash. They can purchase additional digital assets with cash. They can distribute the digital assets or cash to interest holders. They can sell the digital assets for cash in connection with trust liquidation. They can direct the staking of digital assets in a manner consistent with the applicable requirements of the National Security Exchange. So those are the only things they can do. They can't do wild stuff to get yield. They can't do any Sam Bankman-Fried stuff. They can only do the things enumerated right here. Oh, Dr. Payne, good to see you. It has been a while. Thank you for joining. Very good to see you. Very good to see you. Thanks for joining. Next up, the staking provider, and this is important also, I think, for Cardano. The staking provider has to be unrelated to the trust. So the trust, you can't have whoever's running the exchange traded product turn around and say, oh, by the way, we're staking with the stake pools we own. So it can't be that Coinbase situation, right? Where Coinbase, you're onboarded to Coinbase and you're told, hey, they're staking in Cardano. And then it's like, oh, here's Coinbase's stake pools. It can't be that situation. The ETP provider can't also be the stake pool. So I think this is definitely a good rule. But here immediately, I wish they would have included the custodian. I wish they would have said, the trust. Remember, we said that they have to use a custodian, and I wish they would have said neither the trust nor the custodian can be the one in control of the staking provider. So requirement 6 also does add that the staking provider must be doing business with other parties unrelated to the trust or the custodian. So this is actually good because they're saying it can't be that Coinbase situation. So if, Coinbase is the custodian, we know that Coinbase's pools, as far as I know, only tend to Coinbase customers. So hopefully this language means we won't have Coinbase. We already know we can't have the ETP also be the stake pool. Hopefully this bit of language means that the custodian can't also be the stake pool, because I'm sure Coinbase would do that if they could. I'm sure they would. So the actual language is the staking provider regularly enters into arrangements with unrelated persons involving similar activities, and such other persons are also unrelated to the trust, the custodian, and the sponsor. So this is saying the customers of the staking provider have to be unrelated to the trust and the custodian. So that's good language. I do wish it was a little bit more explicit that the custodian can't be running the stake pools, but this is good language right here. So this down here is what I was really looking for. The trust nor the custodian can control the activities of the staking provider. I think Coinbase would have a hard time saying that they're not controlling the activities of the stake pools that we call the Coinbase stake pools. So it looks like finally the language in this document is short-circuiting the idea of an all Coinbase party, where it's Coinbase being the custodian and the pool operator. I don't like this little addition they made. They said the trust, the custodian in its capacity as such, and the sponsor have no legal right or arrangement to participate in or direct or control the activities of the staking provider in any way, and do not do so. I wish they just would have said the trust, the custodian, and the sponsor can't control the activities of the staking provider. This, in its capacity as such, kind of opens the door. To me, that feels like, some lobbying was done there, because this sort of opens up this possibility that we don't want to see, where maybe Coinbase can be like, oh, right now I've got on my custodian hat, but right now I've got on my stake pool operator hat, because it says in its capacity as the custodian. So I wish there was more explicit language right there that the custodian and the staking provider must be unrelated. That's the language I would like to see. And the IRS is not stupid. I'm sure that kind of language was discussed and they ended on this language for some reason, which maybe was just lobbyists in their ear. I don't know. So the trust does have to stake all of its crypto, except in the case of certain exceptions laid out in subsections 9, 10, 11, and 12 of this section of the document. And those exceptions are related to buying and selling, liquidity reserves, network problems, distributing rewards, liquidation, etc. So the trust can't just sort of like decide like, oh, this month we're only going to stake 30%, we're going to stake 40%. They're not really allowed to do that under this guidance. Yeah, Dr. Payne, happy to see you back too. I'm happy the Army of Spies is still intact as well, and happy to see you back. Fly over me. We're going over the IRS's guidance on exchange traded products staking. Yeah, this is Cardano Universe is pointing out the beauty of the scavenger mine, and that's that everyone has an equal chance to mine night. Yeah, maybe not an equal chance. I agree, an equal opportunity. Some people are out competing us, because they're just devoting the time and they have the knowledge to outcompete us technically, which I think is okay. Yeah, Otis Fritio. This also makes me happy I'm in ADA, and we're going to get to that a little bit more specifically in just a second. So here's where we start to really differentiate ourselves from our competitors under this guidance. So this is section 13. It says to protect or conserve the trust property, the trust digital assets are indemnified from slashing due to the activities of staking providers. So this is part of the safe harbor requirements. They're saying that the trust must be indemnified from slashing. This is a huge problem for the robbery forest because they certainly have slashing. So we do know that some percentage of validators in slashing networks will gladly do this indemnification to get the business. Surely they will. But we know that the trustee, the sponsor, and the custodian must perform all appropriate due diligence with regard to the selection of each staking provider. That means they'll have to do due diligence as to whether or not the whatever indemnification they're receiving from these stake pools, I assume that's who would be doing the indemnifying, is even worth the paper it's written on, because there's probably a lot of validators in crypto who will gladly give you an indemnification, but when it comes time to collect, to actually be indemnified for a slashing incident, if it's big, all of a sudden that stake pool is not willing to make good on the indemnification. So it'll be interesting to see what becomes standard for the due diligence as to the indemnification there. Are we going to see the emergence of slashing insurance? It probably already exists in some shape or form somewhere in the robbery forest, but are we going to see slashing insurance pop up? Is that what is going to be required for the trustee, sponsor, and custodian to satisfy themselves their due diligence? Are the stake pools going to have to put up slashing bonds? Beautifully, in Cardano, none of that will be necessary because there is no slashing. So this is a little hurdle. This is a hurdle for the robbery forest. They decided to do proof of stake on, easy mode. I would call it unsophisticated mode. They did it the easy way and just had slashing, but it creates all these problems like we see here. So the slashing indemnification issue may be manageable for some of these other chains, even if they literally need to have slashing insurance to meet those indemnifications. But the liquidity requirements, I think, are going to be a little bit more challenging. So remember, we said the trust can only own cash and units of a single type of digital assets. So the trust can't own any digital asset. I'm reading this as the trust can't own any digital asset other than the single type it has. So it can't, I'm reading this as it can't have like, the base layer asset and some liquid staking derivative. I would say those are different types of digital assets. So if it can't do that, then they've got a liquidity problem. Trusts can't claim to meet, trusts that are trying to stake the base layer assets of some of these ecosystems can't claim to meet the 85% liquidity requirement via holding and distributing staking derivatives. If we're saying that those staking derivatives are a different type of digital asset than the base layer asset, I would certainly say that. That means the asset will have to be staked on chain with less than one business day withdrawals, for example, in Cardano, or the trust must have procedures reasonably designed to address redemption liquidity risks. So if it's not something like Cardano, where it's self-custodied or something so that it can be redeemed on one business day notice, if it's not something like that, they must have reasonably designed policies and procedures to address these redemption liquidity risks. So 85% of their assets have to be redeemable in one day, or they have to disclose their policies and procedures that mitigate those risks. I think that's a pretty significant hurdle. And it's a question mark. What kinds of policies and procedures could address not a bank run in this case, but kind of a redemption run on the ETP where assets are, say, dropping and everyone wants out of the asset. So all of a sudden, the withdrawal queue, say in the robbery forest, is 40 days. How are the trusts going to address that? What policies and procedures will address that? Will they themselves, the trust, have to have some kind of withdrawal queue insurance? Will they have to be insured by some other entity in case this happens? Will they have to have other available funds to cover redemptions of 85% of their assets? Like, how are they going to do this? And once again, none of this is a problem for Cardano. In Cardano, this doesn't exist because we're self-custodied and liquid. So, I'm sure the weird thing is, even given all of this, the language and the analysis, Ethereum is sort of too big, Definitely people are going to want to do this with Ethereum. So they're going to come up with some way around this, some way around the slashing indemnification, some way around the 85% liquidity requirement. And of course, when I looked at other people analyzing this guidance that just came out today, immediately they went to the liquid staking derivatives. But we'll see. We'll see how all this comes down. The beautiful part for us in Cardano, literally a non-issue. So Cardano Universe says the IRS is too big. I think anybody who has ever been taxed will agree with you for sure. With like less of that going on. G'day at Cardano. Thank you for joining. Mark says it's so cool to see how Charles was so far out in front of the curb for regulations. It's true. Charles did a very, very good job at predicting where regulation was going to go and basically architecting Cardano, him and IOG architecting Cardano to mitigate some of these regulatory risks. I agree with that very much. So here's another sort of analysis. This is an attorney who worked at the DOJ and at Consensus. So obviously, a lot of experience with the EVM world. So he sums it up as, hey, these trusts, these ETPs are only going to be able to hold one digital asset. They're going to have to use a qualified custodian. They're going to have to maintain SEC-approved liquidity policies, ensuring redemptions can occur even with staked assets. They're going to have to keep arm's length arrangements with the independent staking providers, and they're going to have to limit their activities to holding, staking, and redeeming assets without discretionary trading. They can't do, the Sam Bankman-Fried thing where they're taking your assets and doing all kinds of things to them and get all kinds of yield, basically risking your assets, as we know from the Sam Bankman-Fried episode. But largely, I think this is the take most people are taking, that this is all net positive for crypto. But I'm waiting for the other shoe to fall where people start looking at how some of these other ecosystems that don't have self-custodied staking are going to deal with some of the details in there. So I think that'll all filter out in the next couple of days. So some other amusing news. So there's a proposal. This is not a new rule. People were calling this a new rule. Apparently, it's just a proposal that the Bank of England has proposed, the possibility. It was I don't know if it was a discussion draft or something, but it was some kind of a draft that proposed the possibility of a rule that you could only have 20,000 pounds of stable coins. Obviously, I think probably there are people in this chat who have had more than 20,000 pounds of stable coins, at some point in their crypto journey. There's probably people like that in this chat. So, of course, everybody's going crazy, saying that seems ridiculously low. How would they possibly enforce that? A lot of people saying, you would never know if I had that amount. But I thought it was amusing. We're still at that stage in crypto where, legit regulators would even, suggest something like that. Yeah, that's the hilarious part, that it's only 20K. A lot of traders are happy to trade in and out, slip in and out of 20K pounds worth of stable coins. So here's the other thing that came out of Washington today. So this seems very impactful, and it's actually way more premature. Like, a lot of people celebrated this today. Some other, sort of crypto accounts were talking about this like it was some huge triumph, like the government's open and we finally got the Senate draft. So the problem is, this is just a discussion draft. So it's out of the Senate Ag Committee. Why agriculture? If you don't know, you're probably wondering, why are we talking about the Agriculture Committee when we're talking about crypto? It's because that's where commodities live in these Senate committees. They live in the Ag Committee. So, like all things, you've got somebody on the right and somebody on the left, because this is a bipartisan bill. So you've got sponsors on the right and the left, and they take very different approaches to this, as we'll see when we look at the actual bill. So you see language like this. You can tell just from the rhetoric. The CFTC is the right agency to regulate spot digital commodity trading, and it is essential to establish clear rules for the emerging crypto market while also protecting consumers. This discussion draft advances those goals and lays an important marker as we work toward final policy language. And then you get the language from the other side of the aisle. More Americans are engaging with novel financial markets and payment systems than ever before, and Congress must take steps to strengthen and expand regulatory frameworks to protect consumers from predatory practices. Basically, calling crypto, predatory. Keep our markets safe and prevent bad actors from exploiting regulatory gaps. So this language is all about predators, bad actors, exploitation of regulatory gaps. This bipartisan discussion draft would provide the CFTC with new authority to regulate the digital commodity spot market, create new protections for retail consumers, and ensure the agency has the personnel and resources necessary. So it's like, let's make sure the agency gets bigger as part of this. Down here, it's a little more inflammatory. You see the sort of the closing language down here is more like, the CFTC plays a critical role in maintaining the integrity and stability of our financial and derivatives markets. As Congress works to expand authority for the Commission to oversee the trading of digital assets that are commodities, it is essential that we also ensure that it has the tools, personnel, and resources necessary to carry out this new mission, along with this current responsibility is strengthened. So this is also like expanding the agency kind of language. This is a little bit more aligned, but then you look at the closing language down there. This discussion draft is a first step, and we still have significant work to do before advancing the legislation out of committee and eventually to the Senate floor. I'm specifically concerned about the lack of resources and the bipartisan commissioners at the CFTC, preventing regulatory arbitrage, as well as ongoing corruption of public officials, and whether Congress has created the correct guardrails to prevent those misdeeds. So it's a little darker and stormier on one side of the aisle always when it comes to crypto legislation. It's kind of like they're being forced into it. And really what they're worried about is ongoing corruption by public officials and misdeeds and bad actors and predators. And the other side, is like quite a bit more positive. But all of that is what we expect. We're going to jump into the bill a little bit in just a second. So people are commenting on the Bank of England, sort of proposed rule. Frazek says, you can't hold gold, you can't hold stable coins, typical examples of government overreach. Yeah, if you're in crypto, it probably feels that way. Last Gambit says, anything we can't control is a bad actor. Also feels that way. When I read language like that, it kind of feels that way. GBAM98 says Coinbase Global is launching a new platform to allow individual investors to purchase digital tokens before they're listed on its exchange. I don't know about that. That's like, that'd be some early stage stuff. I'd be interested to see how that's gonna work out. I'd be interested to see how that one's gonna work out. So we're not gonna go through the entire bill here because as you can see, this is a 155-page bill. But what I will say is there are significant differences between this bill and the Clarity Act. So we've also got the Clarity Act. So the Clarity Act does certain things. The Clarity Act, which is the act that was passed in the House, crypto was pretty happy, I think, with the Clarity Act. So here's the Clarity Act. What we got in the Clarity Act were these, kind of like well thought out, good definitions of, things like digital commodities. And digital commodities in the Clarity Act are kind of defined as, these assets that are intrinsically linked to blockchains. And they basically say, like, hey, decentralization is going to come in here when, blockchains, they might, start issuing assets. But then, something like, roughly 4 years after the issue of those assets, they need to become what we're going to call mature blockchain systems. And they've got some definitions of mature blockchain systems. And it's basically like a lot of different ways of saying the blockchain is decentralized. It can't be this VC controlled thing. It's all very positive language, what we want to see. And, somebody in the ecosystem would need to certify that blockchain as a mature blockchain system. So they would apply for certification. And as soon as it's certified as a mature blockchain system, then you're kind of good to go. And we'll just say you're decentralized and, all these disclosure requirements and things will go away. So, and they've got, other definitions, things like end user distributions. And these are kind of just like, decentralized distributions of assets. And they're distinguishing those end user distributions from, like selling big blocks of crypto to VCs and things like that, and insiders, who will then try to dump those assets on, the everyday users. So, the Clarity Act has a bunch of definitions like that. And as you can see, it's pretty extensive. It's well thought out, a lot of sections. It's a big act, and it's like, it's kind of a complete system for regulation of crypto and dividing the crypto world up into securities regulated by the SEC and commodities regulated by the CFTC. Obviously, you want to be a mature blockchain system under the Clarity Act, so you can be regulated by the CFTC and not the SEC. And as Rulo points out, not many will qualify as mature. Yep, I think Cardano, once again, this is a case where Cardano has architected itself so that it meets the requirements of decentralization. Because really what this all boils down to is just decentralization. They have to write this giant act to, attempt to close up as many loopholes as possible so that clever people can't, not be decentralized in various ways and still meet the requirements, that kind of thing. So the Clarity Act was welcomed by, largely welcomed by crypto. We were pretty happy with this. And it looked a lot like all the different acts we saw advanced by our allies in Congress, all of the Lummis and Gillibrand, proposals, Fit 21, a lot of them had these same, the same right ideas about decentralization. Hey, you don't want to be regulated by the SEC. You don't want to have all these disclosure requirements. You don't want to have all these requirements when an insider sells, crypto that they got for free, basically, or very cheap. Fine, just be decentralized, because that's the goal in crypto. It makes decentralization the goal. You could just say decentralized blockchains instead of mature blockchain systems. That's not what happened with this draft. So this draft looks like this. It's 155 pages. It doesn't have, the same terminology. It doesn't have this big definition of end user distributions. It has a different definition of digital commodities. It doesn't have this intrinsically linked language. It talks about, assets that can be transacted with no intermediaries, which brings up all kinds of questions about, what's an intermediary? Is the stake pool an intermediary? Lots of questions come up. But importantly, it also treats this, it doesn't have this notion of mature blockchain systems. So under the Clarity Act, you could be a blockchain and start issuing assets, and you're not quite yet decentralized, which is, we all know that's kind of the case with every blockchain. It starts out, and as it's being created, it's not really decentralized from go. It has to do that initial distribution, to become decentralized. So under the Clarity Act, you can do that. You can do your initial distribution, make a bunch of disclosures to the SEC, and then eventually within 4 years or something like that, somebody in the ecosystem, files the certification for it to be declared a mature blockchain system. That's not the way it works in this new Senate draft that just came out today. This draft, it's like, hey, you have to certify from go. You need to certify right at the start for trading as a digital commodity, and we're going to treat it that way. And a lot of the other things in the, obviously I haven't had a chance to read this in detail yet, but I noticed a lot of other things. Like in the Clarity Act, there's this whole carve out for goods, collectibles, and other non-commodities. And here they're trying to hit, like NFTs. And they talk about things like, digital assets that are really art, music, literature, other IP, collectibles, virtual land, basically metaverse parcels, and video game assets. And they say, hey, we're not going to treat those as commodities because we feel like, basically it's obvious they feel like they need less regulation. So and this happens in a lot of places. This ag committee bill that came out, it copies kind of that framework, but then it just makes it worse. So it copies that whole framework. It says, yeah, there are these things called good collectibles and other non-commodities that are not quite the same as the digital commodities we're trying to regulate up above, but we're only going to say those are not subject to the same regulations so they're only going to be called a collectible that's not subject to those other regulations as long as there isn't, by virtue of the distribution of those assets, some kind of market scale trading among unaffiliated persons. And then they say they'll decide the definition of market scale trading will be decided by CFTC rulemaking in the future, basically. So it's like similar in a lot of places. They use the same framework that the Clarity Act used, and then somebody came in and just made it like worse. It was just like, oh, the Clarity Act is very crypto friendly. How do we use the same framework and make it kind of like not crypto friendly? And you notice there's a lot of also in this bill, you can tell it's it's very much just a discussion draft, because a lot of things are bracketed. If you don't know, when you're creating a document like this, you'll bracket things that are sort of undecided or up for debate. And if you look at what's bracketed, like treatment of certain non-controlling blockchain developers, it's very much bracketed. And if you go to that section, so this is where the Clarity Act says, hey, if you're a blockchain developer and you build some platform and you just launch it and you don't control it after launch, it's controlled by, no one or some DAO, but you're no longer the one exerting control over this platform, then, we're going to treat you very differently than somebody who built a platform and then 100% is in control of that platform. Obviously, you think of things like, the Tornado developer who, is he still in jail? Is he still on trial? I don't even know. But obviously, it's built around the problem with the prosecutions of people like that who are like, hey, I had no control over the platform. If, people used this for illicit money laundering, I had no involvement in that whatsoever. So this is some sort of exculpatory language to help the developers in that position. So in this draft, you can see that's bracketed. And when you go to that section in this draft, what you see is they've got some language like that. But then you have a bracketed section that says minority view, and you know which side of the aisle that's on based on who controls the Senate right now. And the minority view is, hey, we should actually work with the Senate Banking Committee to address this whole non-controlling blockchain developer issue. So basically they're saying like, hey, yeah, we're not sure we're in for that. We're not sure we're okay with that. Maybe we hit these guys with some KYC AML requirements. Let's talk to the banking committee, and what is the banking committee going to do? They're going to treat this very differently than the agriculture committee. The banking committee is all about Bank Secrecy Act and all the AML KYC stuff. So they're basically saying like, yeah, on this side of the aisle, we think the banking committee should get involved with some KYC AML stuff. We should consult with them on whether or not these non-controlling blockchain developers get off the hook completely. So you see that in a lot of different spots in this draft. You can tell just by the brackets, like look at this, anti-money laundering bracketed in this draft. Registration bracketed, DeFi bracketed, even the name of the bill bracketed. And just by sort of the table of contents, the list of sections here, you can tell this is very skeletal. A lot is going to happen to this thing before it actually, gets voted on. Or passes the Senate a lot and would have to go back then to the House to reconcile the Clarity Act and whatever comes out of this process. But this is very skeletal and it's very short compared to this. If you look at the sections in this, look at this. Has how many titles? 6 titles and a lot more detail instead of just like, whole sections bracketed, like we don't even know which direction we're going to go on this. Everything's all very well fleshed out. So although a lot of people are celebrating the introduction of that discussion draft, I think the people celebrating that on social media today are probably not the people who actually read it. I only gave it a cursory read and I could already tell very skeletal and not very skeletal as, a discussion draft can be, but also in the places where it's not skeletal, it's already going in directions that are much worse for crypto. I wouldn't say like fatally worse. The stuff that I noticed is maybe not fatal to crypto, like some of the other proposals we've seen, but it's definitely significantly worse than the Clarity Act. So that's what's going on with this Boozman-Booker discussion draft. Let's see. Binocam says decentralization was one of the core tenets of crypto to begin with and never got forgotten in crypto land. Truer words have never been said. So Brian Packard says 80 people watching and only 12 likes. Hit the likes. Thank you, Brian, for saying that. I appreciate it. Last Gambit says, yeah, sadly, many in the space just decided number go up is all that matters. I can't even. Greetings. Thank you for joining. Last Gambit says BTC trajectory. Hope we get to that number. So, okay. So Last Gambit is trying to buy, obviously. Otis Fricio asked him if he's hoping for a Black Friday sell. He's hoping. USDM, welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. It's worrisome. Yeah, I think it's. I wish this had been. It would have been great when I first saw people posting about this morning. I was hoping it was something a little bit more consistent with the Clarity Act, or even if it's a different approach, something as pro crypto as the Clarity Act. And I mean, this isn't terrible. We've seen worse proposals for sure, but this is pretty skeletal, which means they've got a long ways to go, a lot of things to argue about. And the rhetoric in this little press release is, not exactly what you want to see. It's kind of what you expect. But I think the bill is worse. I wish it was just a difference in policy. Like it was a different compromise on the spectrum between the pro crypto factions and the anti crypto factions. I wish it was just policy. It's actually like, I think kind of a worse regime. It's not as fleshed out, and mechanically, I think it's kind of worse what I've seen so far. So yeah, we've got it is a little worrisome. I think USDM stablecoin is right. It is a little worrisome. Last Gavin says, I can see the Dems brains twirling on anything bracketed. What does this mean? How does we makes it bad? Definitely, how does we makes it bad it happen in this draft? They definitely slanted things in the bad direction in a few different ways. Rulo says, so weird they don't mention Fibonacci levels required to be approved as mature. Someone think about the TA influencers. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they should have had a whole section on regulation of Fibonacci. Actually, I would welcome that section if they had a whole section regulating the YouTube Fibonacci makers. I probably wouldn't have cried about that if they somehow reduced the Fibonaccios. I've said it many times on this channel, but sometimes the Fibonaccios get too damn high. The Fibonaccios get too high. Yeah, that'd be nice. Could we have some focus on wash trading? I wouldn't mind that. That was there were some pretty horrendous things that happened, especially during the big NFT days last cycle. We saw some pretty horrendous things happen. Let's face it, there's a lot of manipulation in crypto, and I don't mean like that. Oh, the centralized exchanges, the market makers, that kind of like conspiracy theory type manipulation. But I mean like, you know, projects, small projects engaging in their share of manipulation too. Um, Polymarket has an ADA ETF for 2025 at only 42%. What do you think? I have no idea. That's a question I'm keenly interested in. I would not dare speculate because 2025 has been full of surprises so far, and I would not value any speculation I would make, very high because 2025 has been nothing but surprises. So I don't think we really know. The mining, yep. The mine, it's been fun. It's been fun being a, like basically LARPing as Bitcoin miners has been super fun. And for the people who did it really successfully, the people who outcompeted all of us, it's they weren't LARPing. That was for real for them. I mean, depending on what the night price is. So we'll see what the night token actual price is once that, that first tranche of 25% drops, and also each subsequent tranche too. I think it's going to be a little discovery session figuring out what the price is going to go to when each of those drops. So, we'll see. Was the mining, massively worth it for those people or not? We'll find out. Emilio says we could already be in that BF cell if it lasts until the fiat or refining. I will not wait or hope for a lower. Yeah, the Black Friday sell. I yeah, I personally, when I was still fiat mining full time, when I was still down deep in the dark and treacherous fiat mines, I was always hoping for the sells. I was always hoping that this would happen, but it's November of Q4 of year 4 of the cycle. That is the time when I stop hoping for the sells. I start hoping for, the party. I'm like, win party. Last gambit, the macho Fibonaccios. We have actually, Cardano is pretty good. Cardano is not the most Fibonacci laden ecosystem. And actually the guys who do the most Fibonaccios in Cardano are pretty nice guys. So I wish they weren't as nice as they are. So obviously I haven't had extensive interactions with any of them because I'm anonymous, but every time I talk to somebody who like works with the Fibonacci masters in Cardano, they always tell me how nice they actually are. So I try to compartmentalize my joking about the Fibonaccios from the actual individuals, because the Fibonacci masters in Cardano are tend to be pretty nice guys, I think. Along with kind of all the personalities in Cardano, like there's nobody who I could really point to who I think, just like sucks as a person. Every time the people who work with them talk to me, they tell me that those people are pretty okay. So win Stimmy. And we were joking the other night that Stimmy would come in the guise of World Liberty. What do they call it? World Liberty? Is that the name of it? I paid so little attention to that ecosystem. I don't even know what it's called. World Liberty Financial Coins. So that would be an incredibly bad PR move, I think. Very bad optics, but this administration, I'm not going to say they're the optics masters. They're not the masters of good optics. I will say that about them. B117 says, I finished yesterday with like 10 unsolved on my scavenger mine. Any tips? It's only medium. I'm not going to make it. Yeah, I've had some unsolved. The number of unsolved has definitely gone up for me. And I've got like I don't have the slowest I've got a couple different machines. One's a little bit lower, one's a little slower, and its capabilities are a little lower. And then I've got a fairly new machine. It's like the processor in this machine is a lot of people are still buying gaming machines. I got this a couple years ago. But I kind of got like the best processor I could at the time. And a lot of people are still buying gaming machines that are worse than that have processors that are worse than the one in this machine. But even so, it's definitely missing a few. I'm getting a few unsolved for sure. ETFs will be none or few, and then suddenly all at once. It feels like everything in crypto is always that way. It's like nothing and then everything all at once suddenly. I feel like that's the story of crypto. Sadly, I wish it was more gradual. It's sort of like instantaneous ecstasy or utter rejection. that's how crypto is, I'm afraid. Adam says, I think that's the market structure draft that made Charles rip his stuffed lobster's head off a few weeks ago. Did that happen? Did he accidentally rip Logan's head off? I assume if that actually happened, I assume it was an accident. Like he went to move Logan or something and his head came off. Did that actually happen though? Did Logan lose his head? Okay, last gambit is going to talk specs here. I have an i9, 64 gigs RAM and a 5080, and all I do is look at crypto charts and play emulated games from the 90s. I'm doing it wrong. You definitely do not need an i9 with 64 gigs of RAM and a 5080 to play emulated games from the 90s. I played those games originally in the 90s on an 8-bit Nintendo, so I know you do not need a 5080. Anybody play the new Skate 4? It's free to play, but it won't work on a potato like AOS's mining rig. Yeah, I'll bet I could play Skate 4. Actually, I don't know. I haven't looked at that game at all, so I don't know. But I can play a lot of games on this rig right here. I can play many things. I haven't had any failures in that direction, but I play a limited number of games. So, K Wong, yeah, you can go back and check out the video afterwards. Check out the replay, and you'll see some things. We talked a lot about what's going on in Cardano and what's going on out of Washington. Two big things out of Washington that I think are impactful. So you can go back and check those out. I can't even says I agree with where crypto is going. ETFs are just for traffic until they catch up with the times. B117 says I'm 0-6 on today's problems solved. Not good. Yeah, that's I think the rubber is kind of hitting the road, and people are going to start running into problems here. But we're more than halfway through the whole scavenger mine, so we kind of had a good run. I'm sort of right now. I'm sort of debating. Yesterday, I was kind of debating, hanging it up, but today, partially just because of the boost, because they started reflecting the 627 million to 1 billion boost. Partially because of that, it was morale became high. Morale became high around my place when that started being reflected. But we'll see how things look tomorrow, huh? Okay, Flying Hambone says 4070 Ti run everything perfect on my 1440p ultra wide. Okay. Wonder if that midnight miner that posted 3% of total share has been able to keep that up 30 million. Yeah. So I also did the calculations and immediately, like I'm sure everybody did in my head, to figure out how much they would get total. And the number of solutions submitted on day one was like, what was it, like 8 million? And we got up to about 20 million just a couple days ago. So it changed massively. I'm sure that person's share of solutions also changed massively. But it would have been very wild if that person had gotten that amount. It would have been good for them, bad for the rest of us, I guess. FOMO, yeah, I mean that's pretty much what's fueling the scavenger mine. I would say that the things fueling the scavenger mine on our side. So if we're kind of the community on our side, it's sort of like the nostalgic fun of LARPing, like we're Bitcoin miners in 2012, 2011, 2010, even. That's kind of fun from a nostalgia kind of perspective. Even if you weren't around in those days, you still know of it. That part's kind of fun. On the sort of IOG midnight side, they've got this metric that, they're going to talk about, which is the number of wallets involved. So for them, it's like, they're going to be able to talk about the crazy number of wallets, which gives them an incentive to not cut off all the, all the, all the automated forms of mining, all the bot mining and everything, and guys having, 600 wallets or whatever it is. So that's kind of fueling the mining mania on their side a little bit, I'm sure, because it's going to produce good numbers. There's no way to really measure humans because we don't have proof of human. So the next best thing is wallets, and that metric is going to look really good for them by the end. Also on our side, it's like there's this uncertainty. It's like we're all mining some amount of night if we're mining, maybe not anymore. I'm sure some people have already quit or their rigs just aren't working anymore. But, up until, the last couple of days, we were all sort of mining night to some extent. And the upside of that was indeterminate because we didn't know what the price was going to be. So you could kind of, still have the fantasy that your night is going to be worth a huge amount, even if you didn't get much in the glacier drop allocation and you weren't mining that much. You could still imagine, whatever price you wanted because nobody has any idea how much night's really going to be worth. There's all kinds of guesses out there, but it's like so uncertain. So yeah, I think there's a lot of FOMO out there. I think there is a lot of FOMO. But as the mining becomes more burdensome, some piece that'll definitely wear off. Oh, Adam was just kidding. Okay, I'm kind of glad to hear that. Logan is kind of a fixture on that mic stand, that mic boom. So I'm actually kind of happy that Logan's head didn't get knocked off. And I've always talked a lot about lobsters, so I'd be sad if the most visible lobster in the entire ecosystem was beheaded. So I'm glad it's not the case. Yeah, I think he was probably mad about that previous proposal we saw that completely butchered the whole thing. It was a completely different take on market structure. That was a terrible proposal. I didn't even read it once I saw people talking about some of the things they were doing, but that was a complete butcher job. So this is definitely better than that. This one has problems though. It's not as good as Clarity Act for sure. D not you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the comments are pretty good. I agree. I think the stimulus is for people. Yeah, that's true. So we talked about this a little bit last night in Trump's tweet about his $2,000 stimulus dividends. Notice he didn't say checks. He said, dividends. He mentioned it's not for high income people. So the question becomes, what is high income? Because I think a lot of people in crypto, we're not the least well-heeled bunch. You know what I mean? There's a lot of normal people like me and you in crypto, but there's also a lot of other people who are pretty well-heeled in crypto. So for them, the stimulus won't even matter. So, and it depends on how they calculate it too. Is it going to be off like last year's taxes? A lot of us might be in trouble if that's how they do it. Certainly if assets were included. He said high income, so we can hope it's not assets, but if it's assets, a lot of us who hold crypto will be in trouble. By trouble, I just mean we wouldn't get the dividend. But yeah, I mean, it could be. Then Scott Besson, we talked about it last night, but then Scott Besson kind of walked it back and said, the dividend could come in a lot of forms. Maybe it's just no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. Maybe that's the dividend, which sucks. That's like very different than what Trump had us all imagining, which is checks. Last Gambit says, I had every intention to game on it. I just have been too busy with the current market cycle timing and need to focus when I am not in dad mode with the little one. Plenty of time for that later. I also have not been able to game much at all lately. Not much at all. Let's see. Scolder G3J says, talk about the midnight donate API endpoint not being available. Oh, I don't know about this. Please describe. I don't know anything about this. I legit need to learn how to do this midnight browser mining. I haven't even looked into it yet. I should probably do that. Yeah, I mean, if you want to experience this, you should probably experience it. It'll be kind of fun to say you participated in the scavenger mine. Years down the road, like, we still talk about how the ITN was kind of fun. That was the incentivized testnet for Cardano. So when that was like the first emergence of stake pools, that was kind of fun for everybody who like participated in the ITN. And it's kind of fun and nostalgic to talk about it now. So you should probably do it. You should probably just go to the Midnight Foundation, original posts about it. Just go to their posts on X, and they'll give you a link, and you can go in there. And it's not difficult to set up a wallet and just start mining. I would just do it so that you could say you participated later on. It'll be fun. I would do it. Okay, so for anybody who wasn't here, we also talked about I mentioned that in the past, I had totally encouraged people to go to Cardano conventions and things and tell people that they're the person behind this channel to help obscure my identity. So I've 100% encouraged that in the past, and I still do. So we talked about the possibility of having shirts that say like, my name is AOS. This is pretty good. The question was what to put on the back. Let's go on the back is pretty good. That's pretty good. Actually, maybe that's the shirt we should have. I'm thinking we talked about I am AOS, but I wonder if we just had like a little logo that looks like a name tag that says my name is AOS, and then on back it just says let's go. I kind of like that. What do you guys think about like maybe Cardano logos on the on one of the sleeves, something like that? So, like I said, though, the problem is whenever there's a good idea for a shirt, it's always like amazing how few. It's amazing how low the volume of actual purchases is, and even if I like don't bake in any like profit margin into it, because the volumes are pretty low, the prices end up being pretty high. So I kind of hate that. It looks like I'm trying to charge a lot for shirts, and it's really just that the volume is really low, so the price ends up being high. So there's that problem with the shirts, but I like this idea. Okay, the donate to endpoint. Yeah, I assumed it allowed you to designate a certain wallet. So Scolder's saying the donate to endpoint lets you consolidate all your addresses midnight to one wallet. That would be nice. That would be really nice. Midnight Foundation should make the donate to endpoint available. Are they intentionally making it inaccessible? Actually, that would go along with what I was talking about earlier. So I suspect that a big a good metric for them that they can use in their PR around this is related to how many wallets, right? So if they allow people to consolidate all their midnight to one wallet, they would be promoting lesser perceived performance on that metric. They're going to be able to say, the number they're going to be able to cite for number of wallets that participated is going to be lower if everybody's consolidating into like a single wallet. Obviously, be good for us as the end users, but I have a feeling that would be part of the discussion, that it wouldn't help them on probably the most important metric, how many wallets, because there is no how many humans, because we don't have proof of human. It matters to us in crypto, regardless of income, if we have bags. Yep. Morning, Mallow. Morning. Thomas Kirkpatrick says Stimmy for holiday season would really spike social interest at perfect time with Cycle. Yeah, I agree strongly with that. For some reason, the Santa rally is real in crypto. We used to the explanation of the Santa rally has always been pretty simple to me. It's always seemed overly simplistic, like, kids are getting money from their grandparents, stuff like that, and they, blow it on crypto, that kind of explanation, or people are buying crypto as gifts for other people. But whatever you think it actually is, the Santa rally has been real. I shouldn't say it is real because I have no idea what's going to happen this cycle because it's so weird. But the Santa rally has been real. So stimmy, a little stimmy for the holiday season would yeah, probably not hurt many feelings in crypto. Okay. Okay, Otis Fritiov is agreeing. He's in Otis Fritiov is in consensus. You should try mining. When your kiddo is older, you can say, back in 25, I mined this for your higher education. That'd be cool if somebody mined a bunch of Night and Night was very successful for like the next 20 years, and then they were able to use their Night to pay for their kids' college. That'd be great. I can't even say they're aware probably, but realize it's not something a regular person would try doing. Crypto is still too advanced. The regular person really consolidation of addresses isn't a normal ask. Yeah, that's the donate to endpoint. Yeah, that's true also. The number of people who would actually use it is probably pretty low. Jose, you're talking about language. I would love a cyberpunk Japanese themed AOS t-shirt. I can't disagree with you on that. The cyber, I'm a sucker for anything that has the word cyberpunk in it. So of course I'm going to agree with that. Last Gambit says, I remember mining my first Bitcoin block and then trading a BTC for it for some Diablo 2 gear. Yeah, that was stupid. Still cooler than pizza. The story is, this is always the same story. Everybody I run into when they tell me about the Bitcoin they mined, it's always like, the last person I had this discussion with bought a motorcycle with it. It's always the same story. It's like everybody I meet immediately spent it on something, and they kind of like, they have the same reaction as you, but they're also kind of like, but the motorcycle was awesome. Well, they're kind of like, of course, happy about it, but also they know if they'd have hung on to it, it would have been worth a crazy amount. I too have these stories at a certain point. This is way back in the day, probably 2014. I did what everybody does in crypto. I thought I could trade, which is, if you're unaware, that is not true. None of us can trade, basically. Trading is a bad idea. And the amount of Bitcoin I was trading with back in 2014 is an amount I would love to still have. I would love to have the amount I was trading with at my peak, and I easily could. But hey, hindsight is 2020, and I've still got some Bitcoin from back in those days. I think the Bitcoin I have now, it might be from 2014, it might be from 2015, 2016. But the amount I've still got is from that era. And I'm glad I've still got the amount I've got. I wish I would have had the amount I had at my peak, though, of course. Skolder says, artificial inflation of wallet makes us seem illegitimate. Yeah, I'm not saying this is anything that, the Midnight Foundation or IOG would agree with. They would probably vociferously disagree with the things I was saying about that number of wallets metric. But, I'm a skeptical guy. So I'm always going to, immediately think of, kind of like I'm skeptical of people's intentions, even if they're people I like. Like, I like IOG very, very much. And I like the Midnight Foundation very, very much. But I'm always in my mind, part of it is because of what I've always done for fiat mining. Part of that always leads me to immediately think about, what a person with, not, I don't want to say bad intentions, but what would the most self-serving position, what would the most Machiavellian thing to do be in this situation? I always go there first because that's what normally happens in my fiat mining world. It's always the Machiavellian thing. I'll just put it that way. With the current level of national debt and inflation, stimmy is the last thing the government should do. Yeah, Frazek, this is a conversation this is something I've talked about a little bit on the channel. Not a little bit, a lot, because it's constantly in my mind. Having the amount of affinity for Austrian economics I do, I'm always conflicted because the Austrian economics approach to all these questions is like, even though Austrian economics is such a big influence on sort of the crypto ethos, what would be good from an Austrian economics perspective is often the exact opposite of what would be good for crypto as a risk asset in 2025. So, I mean, from an Austrian economics perspective, you don't want the central banks manipulating the supply of currency. That's something you obviously don't want from an Austrian economics perspective. However, given that we've basically done nothing but that since the GFC, if you're a risk asset, you have to acknowledge that it's good for you as a risk asset, so philosophically, I certainly don't want it, and I agree with you very much. I also, as a realist, must admit that it's tended to be good for us in crypto. So I'm conflicted. I know it's not the right thing, but I'm just sort of acknowledging that we haven't done the right thing since the GFC. So I can only expect more of not the right thing. So there you go. Last Gambit says I'd rather have a motorcycle. You mean than the you said Diablo 2. You spent yours on Diablo 2, right? Yeah, motorcycles are good. I agree with that. They're good in terms of fun. I won't say good in terms of lifespan, but definitely good in terms of fun. What would a quality marketing campaign for Cardano consist of? I mean, I think it's I think it's tough because IOG has always had very, very, very capable people in charge of marketing, and you can say that marketing of IOG is the IOG marketing efforts have largely been marketing of Cardano. It's just very difficult, right? Because I think a lot of the marketing we see in crypto, like when I turn on a fight and I see, a crypto ecosystem on the canvas, those kind of things, it has an impact, but I don't know if that's really the kind of marketing that's going to win the day. So I don't know if it's like traditional marketing like that is quality marketing for an ecosystem like ours. I think the ultimate marketing, like the we win everything, all your bases are belong to us kind of marketing is just having a killer DApp that everybody wants to use. I hate to say it like that because it sounds so trite, but I think, I've talked about it recently, having the Pokemon Go moment where everybody wants nothing but to use this DApp in your ecosystem. That's the ultimate marketing that wins the end game. The first ecosystem that does that, that's the end game. And some people, when we had that discussion the other night, some people were like, or I should say the notion occurred that, maybe it was NFTs, maybe it was DeFi, maybe it was meme coins, maybe that's the closest we ever come. Somebody offered that maybe it's prediction markets that we've had in crypto for a long time that got popular in the recent political cycle, and that we, currently have in Cardano. We even have our own. Maybe that's the killer DApp that gets everybody into crypto. But I still kind of think there's a use case for crypto out there that is that Pokemon Go thing where, I told the story the other night, but I went into work, when we all worked in, actual physical locations. And during that Pokemon Go thing, all these people in the workplace were like leaving at lunch to go do Pokemon Go. Mind blowing. I'm still holding out hope we have that kind of moment in crypto, and I hope it's our ecosystem that does it. I hope it's a Cardano DApp. That's the kind of like game over thing that could happen. I think that's the best marketing for Cardano. Okay, Thomas Kirkpatrick says round-tripped mini figures trading and chasing shiny new cryptos in early cycles. Yeah. It's weird. I didn't get involved in a lot of weird I didn't learn, I wasn't I know people who got involved in a lot of different ecosystems and lost money. I managed to keep my losses pretty small on weird ecosystems that just like died. I think my losses were pretty small just because I was like I was pretty sensitive to loss. Like I would, be very dissatisfied if, like in the very early cycles when I made a bet on something and it just went completely belly up. I only made very small bets, very, 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 very small bets on things like that. So I kind of lucked out in that respect. Um, but your point still holds though. Going through some of those early cycles and just the massive, you know, parabolic highs followed by 95% drawdowns. Like that was loss enough. I mean, that was the lesson learning even on blue chip cryptos. That was lots of lessons learned there for sure. For sure. Um yeah, okay. I can't even says crazy, but midnight mining is way different from Bitcoin mining. However, there is something midnight is trying to prove, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing is okay. The cool thing about people being involved in the scavenger mine is I hope people are figuring out, that they're figuring out how proof of work actually works. They're understanding that we've got this algorithm, Ash Maze. It's not SHA-256 like early Bitcoin mining, but we're doing the same thing. We are coming up with, and I know I'm about to use a word that has a very different meaning in parts of Europe, but we're searching for a nonce that can be an input into this algorithm. And then we're just trying various inputs. It's really the nonce is really this arbitrary number added to the other inputs into the algorithm that produces a digest or an output from the algorithm that's smaller than the target digest. So numerically have a smaller value than the target. And once you get a nonce that results in that digest that's smaller than the target, you have solved the challenge, you know? So it's kind of cool for people to go through that process. If you weren't around during the early Bitcoin mining days, if you were around in those days, you kind of know how mining works. But I hope probably one of the biggest benefits of this is that people will actually experience what they'll like it'll help people understand what hashing actually is, so I think that's one of the biggest benefits that'll come out of this. um but yeah, midnight is trying to prove something for sure. This is like a very Charles thing, I think, that he's got us learning about hashing via larping as Bitcoin miners. I think that part of it's cool though, educationally. Otis Freetube says, Fiat mines can't come early in the morning. I will catch you all next time. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. I know many people are joining from Europe and it's very, very early, or other parts of the world where it's very, very late. So I very much appreciate everybody joining if it's at a bad time. So appreciate it. Okay. I can't even, that mining is not the best way to create or have or maintain value by scarcity. So I agree. I agree. Mining, you know, I remember back in the day when I first saw the arguments that mining was a waste of energy. And I was so like frustrated when I first encountered those arguments. It was kind of frustrating. I'm not a person who gets frustrated easily, but it was kind of frustrating to see that because deep down I knew it was kind of true. Before proof of stake, before things like Cardano launched, proof of work was what we had. And they were like literally striking at the heart of crypto by saying that proof of work was a waste of energy. Um, but is it the best way to have or maintain value by scarcity? I agree with you. It's not. It's not, because it burns a ton of energy. Not even just from not even like a green environmentalist kind of perspective, but just like, we're going through a lot. People are, producing and buying and trading and selling these ASICs and storing them in warehouses and all this craziness just to create and then maintain this value by scarcity. It's like, it seems like there's got to be a better way. And it seems like proof of work is, in a lot of ways, a better way. But I also get all the sailor arguments, about how the only true basis for money, is energy, these kinds of things. That makes sense too. So I think I see both sides of that argument. Thomas Kirkpatrick says, Frazek, train headed to the station regardless, lest we are saved by AI and robot slaves. Might as well take your coins off table in a faux pump and jump ship during the fallout. Yeah, it is kind of sad. I'm going to feel bad when we've all got, Optimus or whatever, or Neo or whatever it is, chilling in our houses. They are kind of our slaves. It's kind of, even though, they're just robots with maybe AI inside them, it is kind of a weird relationship we'll have with them where they're just, it's like that it's like that episode where the butter robot, uh the robot is like serving butter or whatever it was to Rick, and realizes its whole purpose for being was just to serve the butter, and it's like has this existential crisis. It's kind of sad. It's kind of sad. Flying Hambone says, the only thing I want more than knowing what to do for fiat mining is for ADA to hit $10 before end of September. Oh man, you're gonna see me pretty excited on this channel if anything like that happens. I think we will all be extremely excited if anything even approaching that happens. Okay, yep. We do not live in an ideal world. It's true. We are ruled by a giant body of irrational actors. Also true. Patrick, what's up? Thanks for joining. Beamer House, what's up? Thanks for joining. Jet Ski Goose says Scott Bessent keeps being a wet blanket. Wish he never said anything about backtracking on the ADA reserve. I know. I wish Scott Bessent. God, the problem is he's too reasonable. He's like a very reasonable guy. I feel like if Scott Bessent was your neighbor, he'd like occasionally walk over to your house and say something really reasonable, and you just be like, damn it, Scott, stay in your own yard. Because when he says stuff, he sounds so reasonable, he's probably right. And it's always like wet blanket type news. He's totally the neighbor. You'd be like, I know you're right. So just stay on your side. Don't come over to my place. Dust has no cap, can be created and destroyed. I still don't get how all this comes together to produce value to ADA holders. Well, I mean, Knight is riding on ADA rails. We'll see how it all works in practice. I don't want to pass judgment on it one way or the other, really, until we see it in action, because these ecosystems are complex. We probably don't give them credit for how complex they are, and they always surprise us. The way that people use these ecosystems is always surprising. New use cases emerge that we couldn't have predicted, and the incentives always turn out to be a little bit different than we expect them to be. So I don't like to even, try to come to judgment on what things are going to be like until we actually see them in action in crypto, because a lot of it is really novel. Like certainly we have privacy coins with shielded and unshielded transactions already, but Midnight as a partner chain, having those aspects to it as part of the Cardano ecosystem, like I don't think we're really going to know what this is like, what it's going to look like until we see it like on the ground running. And I'm interested. I'm very interested to see what it looks like. Check out Cardano Beam. What is Cardano Beam? Tell me what it is. James Syracuse, thank you for joining. Yeah, at one point they did. What was it called? I think the name started with an M, Mix something. It was Mix something, I think. And apparently that didn't work out. I think that was short-lived. Charles, eventually, I think like a year later, Charles like mentioned it in an AMA, and it sounds like it was short-lived. Like it didn't quite work out. Oh, thank you, Scolder. Scolder, that other Niantic game was called Ingress. Ingress. You know what's funny? After Pokemon Go blew up, Pokemon Go was basically just Ingress, but after it blew up, I discovered that somebody I know very well had been playing Ingress and was quite bitter when Pokemon Go blew up in ways that Ingress had never become popular. And this person's a very nice person, very nice and reasonable, but they were a little bit bitter. I could tell when somebody else told me that they were like some kind of a huge Ingress enthusiast. And this person was, and it was a person that doesn't really game at all, but somehow they become very, very involved with Ingress, and they were quite bitter when Pokemon Go blew up. So hilarious. Okay, thank you. Cardano Beam is a GPS tool for dropping assets to people based on location. Oh, I didn't even know that. How did I not know that? Has that been around for a while? I feel like maybe somebody has told me about this, but quite some time ago. Or is this something new? When ADA ETF, now the government open? That's my question. That is part of the Win Party question, I think. I think Win Party includes Win ADA ETF. We know that we've got the GATA, the Grayscale ADA ETF, which they gave the ticker GATA. We know we've got that on the way. I know a guy that held 500,000 engine from like $4 to basically zero. Laugh out loud. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us round tripped Cardano from, over $3 to 24 cents or whatever in the last cycle. And there were definitely, so 500K. So you're talking like 2 million bucks worth of engine. There were definitely people who had millions of bucks worth of Cardano who round tripped it last cycle. That is definitely also the case, but that's quite impressive. 2 million from 2 million to zero is quite impressive. Okay. Greed Malcoin. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Emilio says glad of listening to you all and opening a second miner on a second wallet, second browser. Cool. Greed Malcoin says creating digital value through scarcity was a one and done. Bitcoin, there will be no others without a service or product that has demand in Web 2. You have no shot in Web 3. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't, many people have tried to launch, like another Bitcoin in various ways, and there will only be one Bitcoin for sure. We already know that from the fate of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, and, many people have tried. I can't wait to buy my first Cyberdyne Systems Model T800 endoskeleton robot to clean my house or terminate me. I know some of the what's the one robot who kept running into destroying people's mirrors, or at least one influencer's mirror got destroyed by the one robot Neo, I think it's called. That was a little dystopic. There was a little dystopia vibe going on there. Rick and Morty, yep. Rick and Morty, some of the I don't think I've seen recent seasons, but some of the early episodes were genius. They were genius. The downfall of the Rick and Morty founder was quite sad. Let's see. Although would be the neighbor to return the borrowed tool. Yes, this is the same. Uh, this is the same neighbor that would return the borrowed tool. It's true. Not a Being reasonable is good for sure. It's just sad when the reasonable position is also the wet blanket position. But you're right. Scott Besant would definitely return your borrowed tool, and he'd probably smile at you every time he saw you. He just seems like a very reasonable person. Dust has a cap according to how much night you have. There is a max amount of dust you have, or so I've heard. Yeah, there's the whole you generate so much and then it deteriorates kind of thing. We covered it on the channel, but yeah, dust is not going to be like a staking kind of thing where you're accumulating it and doing like we do with staking rewards in ADA. Okay. RLUSD, most likely tier 1 stable to come to Cardano. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what stable coin is most likely to come here, or timeline, or anything like that. Flying Hambo, and I forgot there was a founder. Yeah, Rick and Morty founder. Yeah, that was a sad story. It was doubly sad for us in Cardano because he liked Cardano, and I want to say he had like, like there was some kind of like communication between him and Charles at one point or something. I don't quote me on that, but I believe there was some kind of communication between the two of them. Like, it's so sad because it was such a like dramatic and tragic downfall. Oh, I like that. I like that. I am definitely a fan of the X-Files. So Very down with the Scolder name. Um, Knight is the value bearer, gas producer, and the duty payment for ADA's consensus work. Well put. Well put, BindoCam. So I think we've gone for almost an hour and 45 minutes. I think we've covered all of the news we can this early in the week. So far, as hoped on Sunday, this has been a pretty productive week in terms of news. Not all of it great news. Like I wish this Boozman Booker discussion draft had been better, but you can't have all the good news all the time. So I'm glad we're seeing some action, though. I feel like we're moving forward. What a great show. Glad I found it. Yeah, one of my favorite shows of all time. For sure, one of my favorite shows of all time, and was formative because I still remember when the very first episode of X-Files debuted on broadcast television back in the day, and I watched it throughout the 90s. Very formative for me, X-Files for sure. Let's see. Frezik says the round trip trauma may go away to explain the lackluster current cycle. Many are determined to not go through another round trip. The most bullish cycles when many people round trip their bags. True. All of us, unfortunately, round tripping the last cycle was good for the last cycle. If we'd all been smarter and sold off, before, during, or just after the parabolic highs, it would have been worse for the cycle, obviously, because a lot more of us would have been selling. So maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe part of the problem with this cycle, in some, hopefully it's a small contributor, but maybe it's a contributor to, retail never showing up for this cycle. So I think a lot of people went through those 90% drawdowns in the last cycle. And you're right, that's traumatic. Probably scared a lot of people off. Peace, flying hambone. I can't even. Good night. I hope everybody is starting a great week. I hope you're looking forward to a great rest of the week. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on. Talk to you soon.